不少外国人纷纷来到我国定居，享受不一样的风土人情。但到底发生了什么？定居中国的外国人纷纷逃回国，真相让人无奈。
What? What is this? So foreigners are leaving China en masse. Well, they've been doing this for a while now. Now, the key phrase here is foreigner. You have to understand what a foreigner is. By Chinese definition, a foreigner is just anyone that's not Chinese. And I'm talking about anybody that's from America, anyone that's from Russia, anyone that's from Europe. These are foreigners, right? Anyone that's from Africa. If you're from like Korea or Japan, sometimes they'll be called foreigners, but they'll also, actually use their country's name sometimes or say, a fellow Asian person or whatever. But by and large, if you're a foreigner, you're just not from China. And it's not just you're not from China, because if you're a Chinese American, you're in China, you're considered Chinese, right? Even if you're an American citizen, even if you've never been to China before, you're still Chinese. It's about this, it's kind of like a racial identity. If you're not Chinese, then you are a foreigner. So why are foreigners leaving China en masse? Well, it's quite simple. It's just a really bad place to be if you're a foreigner right now. And it's all the byproduct of the Chinese government. When they decide that it's time for something, or they decide that it's time to get rid of something, then it happens. When the Chinese government makes a decision and it becomes the paramount decision of their identity at that point, then it gets done, right? Here's the deal. I moved to China in 2008, and I gotta say, we use this phrase a lot, but it really was a golden period. We call it the golden period of China. I think it spans anywhere from like the early 2000s up until, I'm gonna say like around 2015 is when you got the first inklings that maybe foreigners were not going to be accepted in China anymore. I'd say 2016 was the year that it started getting really bad. And then 2017 was when the writing was on the wall. And if you're a foreigner like myself that had any sort of big following, online presence, a fan base, anything like this, you were definitely on a list for people to get rid of in the country. And that's because during this golden period of China, what happened was the initial leadership, so Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, those two leaders, were kind of more pro-West in a way. Not that they wanted Western values, not that they wanted China to become like a Western country at all, not whatsoever. But they were more in line with the fact that, hey, these foreign companies, these foreign countries, when they invest in China, they make our job a lot easier because the economy goes up, people are given more jobs, China becomes more accepted on the global stage, and people take it more seriously, and people's standards of life gets to improve, right? If you have a fairly open economy, if you have free trade, and you give Chinese people the opportunity to be able to trade with other countries and then also invest and trade with these foreign companies in China, all of a sudden you've got recipe for success. Because then you can operate your Chinese Communist Party and all its restrictions and its freedom, limitations on freedom and stuff, because the average person's life is getting better. The average person's standard of life, their quality, their salary, all this, the food that they can consume, the places they can go on vacation, the things that they can afford to do with disposable income that didn't exist before, means that that person is going to be happier by and large with their new standard of living. And the leadership understood that that was necessary, and not only was that necessary, it was just a huge boon for the Chinese Communist Party, because they could still have their leadership, they could still have their insiders club, they could still have a monopoly over the general power of the country, but people were less apt to complain. So why would it kind of turn for the worst? Well, a lot of things happened, and the most important thing that happened was Xi Jinping was put into power. Xi Jinping was almost seen as like this more liberal, more reformist, kind of more open-minded leader. He was a safe choice. He was appointed by the people within the Communist Party of China because he kind of wasn't a radical. He was just going to do things by the book and maybe even allow for some reform to happen within the Communist Party of China. What happened was he ended up being another version of Chairman Mao. He wanted power, he consolidated power, he got rid of anybody that stood in his way, and he got rid of anyone that could potentially be a problem down the road. Now, in his power consolidation, he went back to the old school theories of communism under Chairman Mao, in that there needs to be a political figurehead, a political leader that has cult-like status, that controls the way the wind blows, that controls everything in the country. And to make sure that any sort of foreign competition is not allowed to proliferate in the country, and that the state can come fully under control over everything, every facet of people's lives, every facet of the economy, of every facet of the way that China deals with the rest of the world. Of course, those things, those authoritarian principles that have killed off many countries in the past, like the USSR and the Khmer Rouge and all of these other dictatorships, those elements that actually hurt and damage a country and turn them into hermit states, kind of like North Korea, is exactly what Xi Jinping has done. And in the process, when you demonize these companies, when you try to have complete control over the economy, over every facet of life, you're going to have to make an enemy. And especially when COVID hit the world, it first started in Wuhan, China needed an enemy outside of itself to be able to point the blame elsewhere, because the people were dying and suffering and the economy was taking a huge hit. You needed to have a scapegoat. You needed to have other countries out there that were the creators of COVID, or they're the ones that let it get out of control, or they're the ones that are trying to hurt China. There's all these outside entities, these foreign forces as they call them, that China made sure that the blame was never placed on themselves. And that in turn creates mass amounts of xenophobia. There were huge campaigns led by the government, and we started to see these unfold, where foreigners were just blamed for everything. And of course, when you have a country that has no freedom of press, no outside information coming in, the Great Firewall blocks off the rest of the world from entering or exiting China, everyone has an intranet, a government-controlled narrative, then of course they're going to start seeing the outside world or foreigners on the street walking around in China as the enemy. Right? Unfortunately, that's just the case. Now, not everyone is guilty of this, but it was definitely a sentiment that was allowed to pervade throughout China. In fact, it was actively encouraged by the government and through its policies and its propaganda. Of course, there's a big problem here, because the Chinese government also relies on foreigners to promote its own kind of utopian bullshit propaganda narrative. It relies on the fact that foreigners do move to China, foreigners like myself, and they use that as propaganda to say, hey, see, it's not us Chinese people moving to America in droves. It's actually foreigners coming here to China, the promised land. And it's used as propaganda, right? Unfortunately, when you demonize that populace, when you demonize the foreigners that are doing promotion for you, you eventually drive them out. And this is kind of how it went down. You had foreigners that were leaving around the same time I did, so 2018, around that time, because the writing was on the wall. They had detained the two Michaels from Canada arbitrarily, just so they had pawns in this game that they wanted to win diplomatically with the US and Canada. You saw things like random drug testing happening all over the country, where they were throwing foreigners in jail before they sent them home and deported them forcefully. You saw Africans being kicked out onto the street just because they were black. And the Chinese government had decided that black people were the cause of COVID at that point. So they were kicked out on the street, removed from their apartments and hotels. You saw very xenophobic and awful racist things coming out of the country, and it was promoted by the government. This was government policy. But then you had the people that kind of stuck through it. And they said, you know what, this has nothing to do with me. I'm just going to keep my head down. This will blow over. And they stayed. But then unfortunately, COVID hit. China started pointing the blame of COVID on other countries around the world, and people started to leave because they were getting dirty looks. People were rushing to the other side of the road to stay away from them, or moving away from them on the subway, or calling them the foreign virus, things like this. Really awful things started happening within China. So then people started to leave, and they said, you know what, maybe I'll just go to Vietnam, or I'll go to Thailand and teach there for a little while. I'm going to go do business in another country until this blows over, and then I'll come back to China. Unfortunately, China closed its borders, and those people weren't allowed back. The vast majority of people didn't get to go back, so they lost their jobs, they lost their pay. China then, at the same time as all this happening, started to nationalize all the private education. So all of these schools, or private educational enterprises that these people had, started to get acquired by the government or forced to shut down. So then a lot of people lost their jobs anyway, and they said, hey, maybe I'll try to find a state-run job. I'll work in a public middle school or a high school. Those jobs dried up too. They were very sought after, fairly highly paid, had decent benefits. And so people had no option or recourse, so they left. So the last people that were left were the people that said, okay, if I leave and I try to come back, I'm not going to be allowed in. I just got to stick it out. I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm going to stay as long as I can, and hopefully this blows over. And some of those people included people that work on behalf of the Chinese propaganda department, the people that work for state media, the people that just do travel promotion and stuff. Some of these people stuck it out, but then even they started to leave, because the writing has never been more clear on the wall that if you're a foreigner in China, you are absolutely not welcome by the Chinese government. They are actively trying to remove people from the country. But that really does backfire because, like I said, they rely on these people to do soft power. So they got to come out with some sort of answer, because guess what? If you look around the Chinese internet, people on the Chinese internet, when they get wind of videos like mine or, the stuff we cover on ADV Podcasts or ADV China or Serpent ZA, when they see things like this or inklings of it or breakdowns of it, they say, why are foreigners leaving China? Because I've been told over and over again by the government that foreigners are moving to China because it's the new promised land. It's a new place to make money. It's just much better than their home countries. So why are they leaving? So the government had to put something out there. They had to put out some sort of explanation, some sort of reason why foreigners are leaving the country. And I kid you not, this is the most insane and hilarious thing you've ever seen in your life.
不少外国人纷纷来到我国定居，享受不一样的风土人情。但到底发生了什么？定居中国的外国人纷纷逃回国，真相让人无奈。众所周知，中国虽然地大物博，但是人口极多，这也就导致了在中国，无论是就业压力还是生活压力都非常的大。想要在中国生存，就必须适应这种超快节奏的生活方式。但是这对于一些生活节奏慢的国家的人来说，几乎是不可能做到的，尤其是欧洲和非洲。非洲人们的生活方式可真是跟中国存在着天壤之别。非洲一直是一个靠天吃饭的地方，由于这里气候高温多雨，到处都有结满野果子的树林，他们就地取材的习惯让人有点接受。比如他们饿了就摘果子捕猎物，渴了就挑河水喝。
So it says, with the continuous growth of China's national strength, foreigners come to settle here in China and enjoy different customs and culture. Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely the reason a lot of us came. I mean, I absolutely loved China. I loved exploring it. I loved getting on my motorcycle and making friends around the entire country, learning about different customs and cultures and foods and languages and dialects and all that kind of stuff. It was an amazing place to be. But this woman says, what happened? These foreigners are escaping back to their countries. And guess what? I can actually claim ownership of part of this phrase here, because the Chinese government, when I made my video about how I had to escape from China, a very harrowing tale of how I nearly didn't make it out, they hate that video. They had entire campaigns of people going out there to try and debunk my escape story. They went out there was forum posts, there was videos, there was paid advertisements about how my story is absolutely not true and how I could have left whenever I wanted and China's a free country and all this kind of stuff. And I see this kind of language, this escaping in quotes, coming back into their propaganda campaign. I'd like to say I definitely had something to do with that. But anyway, these foreigners are escaping back to their countries, a slight at me. Happy to have influenced state propaganda. And the truth is frustrating. It's well known that China is rich and vast, but the population is high, which leads to the fact that in China, whether it's pressure to find a job or the stresses of life, if you want to live in China, you have to adapt to a fast pace of life. So the first excuse that the state is giving, that the Chinese government is giving to you guys as to why foreigners are leaving, is that life is just too fast paced. If you're going to live in China, you got to stick with the fast pace of China. And I can absolutely tell you that is such bullshit, absolute drivel garbage. China is definitely not the kind of place that I would call fast-paced. I would call the population high. I would say it's incredibly crowded in a lot of places, but I absolutely wouldn't say the pace of life is outpacing somewhere like New York City or something, or Tokyo or something like this. The average person in China is not necessarily rushing to get everywhere. I would say life is fairly slow-paced with huge cities with tons of people and stuff, but it's not necessarily like everyone's scrambling to rush around and get everywhere. I think the average foreigner, moving to China would definitely be impressed with how many people there were, but they wouldn't be like, I just can't handle this pace of life. But for people from a country with a slow pace of life, it's just impossible for them to adjust, especially Africans and Europeans. So they're gonna now scapegoat Africans and Europeans, but you're actually gonna see what they're gonna do is only scapegoat Africans, because that tends to be what the Chinese government does. They love to use things like blackface and demean African and black people while at the same time going to Africa to exploit African resources. It's a very weird catch-22 bizarro world situation going on. The African lifestyle is just so different from China. Africa has always been a place with abundant food. What? Due to the high temperature and abundant rain, there are forests full of wild fruit everywhere. It's what they're used to. Life in China is a bit hard for them to accept. For example, if they're hungry, they're talking about Africans, they can go pick fruit or hunt prey. What is this? Is this like a colonialist guide from the 1700s with like a guy in a pith helmet walking around talking about the natives? Because this just came out. When they're thirsty, they just drink from the river. This was what they used as their example as to why foreigners are leaving China. There is a huge mass exodus of foreigners leaving the country, but what they have to do is to find a scapegoat for that. So foreigners now just mean African people. And not only just African people from the continent, African people that come from the very fertile fruit growing regions of Africa. They are used to picking fruit in their front yard and drinking from the river and hunting wild prey. So that's why all foreigners from all countries are leaving, because they just can't get used to that. That makes absolutely no sense. But that is quite literally the kind of level of propaganda you'll see from China. And although, like, you know, a good chunk of the younger people wouldn't buy into this, the general sentiment is what the government puts out there. And that's kind of what the populace has to absorb and digest. And that'll be the official reason. Why are foreigners leaving? It's not because they're making life absolutely miserable for foreigners in China. It's not because they're promoting rampant xenophobia and racism. It's not because they're saying that every country around the world is the enemy of China and China is the only peaceful country in the world and that they have to hold their ground. It's not all of these awful, awful, awful things that you don't even hear about. It's because Africans can't pick fruit in their yard and drink out of rivers and hunt prey. Because that is the official narrative coming out of China. And I hope it gives you some perspective on how obscene and ridiculous the Chinese government is. Because here's the deal. Chinese government, you made your bed and now you gotta sleep in it. You had an entire entourage of people like myself, people like Winston, that we used to go out there and show what real life in China was like, and we inspired hundreds, if not thousands of people to come visit the country because we humanized the country when it was being demonized unfairly, you know, with what we thought on media. We gave a human face to China because China is a human face. It's a human country. It's a beautiful country with a beautiful people. And it's a beautiful country with lots of amazing culture and things to see. It's a fascinating place. But you, Chinese government, have made your bed. You've created a massive xenophobic hotbed for hatred in your own country, which is forcing people to leave. And then you have to go on state media and blame it all on Africans not being able to pick fruit and drink river water. I'm sorry, Chinese government, but it's not the lack of fruit trees, you dumbass. It's because you, the Chinese government, are a massive pile of shit, and you do not make it conducive for foreigners to want to live in the country that you've now created. Hope you guys enjoyed that video. Hope you learned something. If you want to support my work, go to patreon.com/Laowinner86. I talk to you guys there every single day. We're almost at 850,000 subscribers. I'd really appreciate if you guys were able to click the subscribe button and make sure that you're actually subscribed to the channel. I don't usually ask for that. It's like one of those like, oh, make sure you smash the subscribe button. I'd really like to get to that goal. Really appreciate your help. And I want to say thank you so much, Laowinners, and I'll catch you on the next one.